All right, let's go over the questions from Chapter 9, Part A. So the first question is, why did Serafina leave? Well, if you look back in your book, if you look on page 118, it's the very first page of Chapter 9. It's in the second paragraph. It says, she sprang up. She didn't know whether the carriages were bringing friends or enemies, but either way, she didn't want to be seen. So at this point, a lot of people still don't know about Serafina's existence. There are a couple of people that have seen her who she's accidentally ran into, but she's not yet open. She's still very afraid of who wants to know who she is because just everything that her dad is going through. Excuse me. Question number 2 says, what lie is Crankshaw telling and why? So that question is answered on page 120. It starts about the third paragraph. It says, Mr. Crankshaw disappeared right when the battle started, and he hasn't showed up. So that's Braden talking at this point. Then if you continue to read down, it says that Mr. Vanderbilt had said that Mr. Crankshaw said a group of bandits attacked. Why is he telling this lie? I'm not really sure, to be quite honest. I think that Serafina kind of asked the same questions that I'm thinking in my brain as to why Mr. Crankshaw would lie. Because she said, what was he really doing? Where was he when the man in the black cloak attacked? Did he work for him or was he him? So those are a lot of the questions that I have. I don't know where he went. I am thankful that he came back and told the people, hey, this is where Braden and Serafina are. But if he is the man in the black cloak, then why didn't he just attack them like he has all the other children? So we will have to continue reading to figure out what's going to happen next. All right, we are going to go ahead and finish the rest of Chapter 9. So hope you are following along and listening. She looked suspiciously at Mr. Vanderbilt, too. She didn't like the way that he was so tough on Braden, telling him what to do and not to do and how to feel. He had no idea what Braden had been through. He didn't listen any better than her pa and seemed far too quick to accept Mr. Crankshaw's story that it had been bandits. Braden had said that his aunt and uncle had secretly sent him away for the night, so few people would have known he was going to be on the road at that time. And he had said that his uncle trusted Mr. Crankshaw. Were they working together? She tried to think it through. Was it really possible that Mr. Vanderbilt was the man in the black cloak? Did he have some terrible need to swallow up all the children at Biltmore? After the men cleared the second tree from the road, those who weren't continuing on to search for Nolan climbed back into the carriages. The coachman began the intricate task of turning all the carriages around in the tight quarters of the narrow road so that he could head back to Biltmore Estate. I want you to ride with me in my carriage, Braden, Mr. Vanderbilt said. Mr. Crankshaw will drive us. Yes, sir, Braden said. I understand, but we need to bring my horses home. His horses had been harnessed, but there wasn't a coachman to drive them. I'll take care of it, Mr. Thorne volunteered. He walked over to the horses, patted their heads gently as they nuzzled him, then climbed up into the empty driver's seat and gathered their reins. Serafina saw Braden smile, relieved that Mr. Thorne was willing to help, but something struck her as a bit odd. Many gentlemen were accomplished riders, but few had experience with driving a carriage, which was a servant's job. Mr. Bindle, who was riding his thoroughbred, came up alongside Mr. Thorne. Well, there you go, Thorne. You've got a fallback position if you ever lose your fortune. I have to get a fortune before I can lose it, Mr. Thorne said humbly. The two men laughed with each other, but then Mr. Bindle became more serious, tipped his hat to Mr. Thorne and Mr. Vanderbilt, and joined the party of half-dozen riders that was heading out to look for Nolan. Don't wait on supper for me, Mr. Bindle called back to his friends as he rode off with the other horsemen. Soon the carriages were all moving and heading down the road towards home. Serafina wanted desperately to go with them, but she knew she couldn't. She remained hidden in the bushes. She had to suppress a sense of panic that she had been left behind, that she'd never be able to find her way through the forest back to Biltmore. And she missed Braden's company already. She had watched the carriages recede into the distance and thought, "Goodbye, my friend." And she hoped he was thinking the same. But even as the carriages disappeared, she felt a tingling sensation course through her limbs. She should have been frightened in the forest alone. All of her life she had been told to stay away from it. But now, here she was, far from Biltmore, alone in the trees. She had an idea. She was downright keen on it. She just hoped that it wasn't going to get her lost or killed. As she stepped into the empty road and looked down the length of it, she had a weird and foreign feeling from being so far away from her pa and Biltmore and all the commotion there. She half expected to burst into tears, go running after the carriage and wail, "Wait, wait, you forgot about me." But she didn't, and she felt rather grown up about it. The sun was well up now and casting a lovely warm light on the trees. Birds were singing. There was a gentle breeze. Things weren't so bad in the forest. But then she looked down the long road winding through the trees and remembered that she was 11 miles from home. "I'll try to be home for dinner, Pa," she said with a pang of uncertainty in her stomach, and she started walking. But she wasn't exactly heading for home. Not directly. The man in the black cloak had seemed to know the forest very well, and she remembered the tales of folk going missing. She had a creeping suspicion that the man in the black cloak might be some way connected with the abandoned village that she heard tell about. She had decided that she was going to find the old village and see if it gave her any clues. Why would all the people in town abandon their homes and leave? There was a part of her, too, that was anxious to delve into the shadows of the forest to see this mysterious world. It drew her, not just because she was forbidden by her pa to come here, but by the thorny truth of her pa's own account. She'd been born here. She decided to walk on down the road a spell to see what she could see. Perhaps there would be an old sign pointing to the abandoned village, or perhaps she'd meet someone along the road who might be able to tell her how to get there. One way or another, it seemed like she would be pretty easy to find an entire town. As she walked, her mind kept drifting back to her pa. She wished she could get a message to him. He'd be worried sick about her, especially with the horrible tales of disappearing children. She wondered if he ever got that dynamo working. It created the one thing that everyone other than her needed so desperately that night: light. Who in the world would purposely damage an electrical generator? And who would even know how to do something like that? Her pa was the only man on the estate who knew how it worked. Him, and maybe George Vanderbilt if he referred to one of the books in his library. She thought that it was interesting how just about everyone had a special talent or skill, something they were naturally drawn to and good at. And then they worked years to master it. Nobody knew how to do everything. It wasn't possible. There wasn't enough time in the night, but everyone knew something, and everyone was a little different. Some people did one thing, others did another. It made her think that maybe God intended for all of them to fit together like a puzzle made whole. It still stunned her when she tried to imagine her big train mechanic pa carrying a newborn baby out of the forest and taking care of her all those years. It had never occurred to her until now that she belonged anywhere but in the basement with her father. But now her mind ran wild with questions and ideas. She was anxious to get home, but walking down that road, she felt a little exhilarated that she was free and on her own. She could go in any direction she chose. She walked for an hour without seeing a soul, nothing but blue jays and chickadees twitching about her, a few squirrels chattering away at her, and a mink dashing across the road in front of her like his life depended on it. She wasn't even sure she was still heading in the right direction anymore, but she figured she couldn't go wrong if she stayed on the road. Then she came to a three-way split. The left road was the wildest and seemed to be the most traveled. She had gotten down on her hands and knees and studied the rocky ground. It was hard to tell, but she thought that maybe she could see the indentation of carriage wheels. But in the middle road there was it was wide and clear as well, with occasional dents in the ground that might be the hooves of horses. Either one of these roads could be the road to Biltmore. Only the third road was different. It wasn't even right to call it a road, but what used to be a road. 2 old rotting tree firs had collapsed, making an X across the path. Thick vines of poison ivy and smothering creepers grew all around and seemed to strangle the 2 fallen trees. This road obviously hadn't been traveled by carriage or horseback in years. She wasn't sure if a person on foot could get through. She didn't see any sign or marker that identified the road, but it seemed possible that an old, unused pathway like this might lead to the abandoned village. Maybe the state of the road choked off the town, or maybe the forest took back the road when the townsfolk disappeared. In any case, if she had any hope of solving the mystery of the man in the black cloak, she needed clues and information. Where did he come from? What was his story? How could she stop him? Poison ivy had never affected her the way it did other people, but she still climbed carefully through the thicket of vines and thorns. On the other side of the 2 cross trees, she came to a boskage of rotting dead snag with rock on the ground as sharp as axe blades. The narrow, overgrown track twisted and turned and dove down into a rocky ravine, and she could see what lay beyond. As she gazed at the darkened passage, a shiver went through her spine. She had no idea where it would lead her, but she started down the path. And that is the end of chapter 9. Thanks for listening.